First of all, welcome to our Distinguished Speaker Series from the Museum of Discovery and Science, brought to you by the Save Our Seas Foundation. I'm Brady Newbill, our Public Programs Manager, your host this evening, and thank you for joining us. We have a great program lined up. This is one of my favorite talks that we do every year. I change it up a little bit, but we're going to see some familiar faces and some new faces here tonight for our shark expert panel discussion. So we always love hearing about new research in shark science and learning all about some of our favorite and most important species in the ocean. So just a few ground rules before we get started. We're going to keep everybody's microphones muted just to take out any background interference noise so we can all give our undivided attention to our guests tonight. Feel free to have your cameras on or off as you're comfortable. I don't want to catch anybody in super cozy mode, but if you feel like showing your face, it's nice to present to some friendly faces too. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions that pop up in your head, anything that comes up at any time, go ahead and put those questions in the chat. After the presentations, we'll come back to the end and have a discussion. We'll come back to those questions afterwards. So again, you're going to hear about a lot of interesting things tonight. If you want to know more about any of them at any point in time, just put those questions in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end. So just a little bit about our speakers tonight. First up, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Stephen Khajura, a very good friend of the museum's that we haven't gotten to see as much as usual this past year. And it's great to see him again tonight. He is a professor at Florida Atlantic University studying shark migration and is always love hearing from him. And then we have new to the series, Hannah Med, someone we've been looking forward to hearing from. She's the founder of the American Shark Conservancy and has done some research for the Save Our Seas Foundation concerning sustainable fishing and its impacts on shark populations. And then we'll be hearing from Dr. Marianne Porter, another returning guest, an old friend of the museum's, also a professor at Florida Atlantic University studying biomechanics. And if you don't know what that means, you're going to learn about it and be amazed. So once again, any questions throughout the time, put them in the chat. We'll come back around to them at the end. But without further ado, we got a lot of great content from people more interesting for me to hear from. So we're going to get right into it with Dr. Stephen Kajiura from Florida Atlantic University.
Very good. Thank you so much, Brady, for the introduction. And I'm hoping you can turn it on so that I can share screen as well. Is that active now?
You should be. Can you try?
Okay, let me see if I can play this. Ta-da. Okay. And that's good. And let me see if I can share this.
That's
okay.
Good.
Do you see a screen where it says predator and prey? And then
yes,
a bunch of little
playing a little video in the background.
Wiggling around? Yeah. Okay,
yes.
Perfect. That's what I wanted to see. All right, good. Well, again, thank you so much for the invitation to come and talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing in our lab over the past decade or so now. And just by way of background, we've been studying this annual migration of these black-tipped sharks that come down to South Florida since about 2010. It's been a long time. And what I want to talk about is some of the work that we've been doing just as background, but also some of the new work that we're doing, some of the stuff that I haven't presented on before. And just by way of background, every winter down here in South Florida, we have literally thousands of sharks that come down and spend the winter. And here you can see an aerial view and all these little sharks in the water. Well, not that little, but the same size as I am. So, human-sized sharks swimming around, and there's people on the beach over here. They're just debating whether or not to go in the water today. But they're standing there looking at the water, looking at the sharks and saying, maybe not. But we have all these sharks that come down here every winter, and some people are fortunate enough to have sharks literally right in their backyard. Look at this. You can walk out your back door, down the steps, and there are the sharks right there. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be handy? For a shark scientist, that'd be heaven. I'd love to have a house where I can have sharks in my backyard. And these sharks that come down here every winter, they are black-tip sharks. And these black-tip sharks, think of them as like an average size sort of typical shark. When you think of a shark, that's what you're thinking of, a typical sort of shark type shark. And they cap out at about 2 meters total length, maximum size. And most of the ones that we're catching down here are about 172 to 174. So about 5'8" to 5'9" long. All right. And I'm 5'9" tall. So they're about the same size as me. And these black tips, what we've been doing for the past decade is looking at the migration as they're coming down here. And one of the ways that we're doing that is getting out and doing aerial surveys, where we fly an airplane. We outfit a Cessna 172 with a high definition camera out the window of the plane. And then we fly an aerial survey. Now, we initially just covered Palm Beach County by doing Boca up to Jupiter, but we've subsequently expanded that. We now cover the whole Tri-County area, everywhere from Miami up to Jupiter. And we fly along with this camera mounted out the plane, nice and low and slow, 500 feet off the water, as slow as we can safely go in an airplane. And then we record. We record their whole way. And then we take that video back to the lab. We're able to analyze it to count the sharks. How many are there? Where are they distributed? And then look at seasonal abundance and give us an idea of what's happening with this shark migration. Well, this has been particularly informative, and I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But the nice thing about the aerial surveys is it gives you the direct view. I can see the sharks, done. But it doesn't inform us about what the sharks do after they leave here, right? It's fine when they're down here in Florida, but what do they do after they leave? Well, to address that, we need to go out into the field to capture the sharks, instrument them, and see what they're doing after they leave here. Now, this video just shows our fishing boat out there. And again, you can see how close these sharks are to the beach. They're right up against the shore there, and that's where we're fishing for them. This is water that's, not even over your head. So this is fairly shallow water right up along the beach there, and that's where the sharks are. What we do is we go out there, we set our fishing gear. Well, we use the drone to find the sharks first, you see, and then we set the gear on top of them. It's kind of cheating, but it works really well, makes it efficient. And then once we catch the sharks, we bring them up beside the boat. We are able to affix a satellite transmitter on the dorsal fin, and then we let them go. And then what happens then is that shark has this little transmitter on its fin. And every time that fin breaks the surface of the water, that antenna is able to talk to an orbiting satellite overhead and give us the location of that shark. So it looks something like this. As the shark is swimming along, every time that fin breaks the surface, it's transmitting information up to the satellite, then it goes back down again. Well, we're able to get these little GPS locations from these sharks. And by tagging a large number of sharks, we're able to look at the movement of these sharks along the coast. And this is just a first draft of the data. All I want you to take out of this is number one, these sharks hug the shoreline. They are not offshore. They are, these black tips are right up against the beach for the most part as they're making their migration. The second point is these sharks were tagged in January, February, March. So in the early part of the year. And so the light green colors, and then those are all the colors that you're seeing down here in South Florida. By the time you get into April, May, you're starting to see these sharks, the light green and the yellow colors, they're moving their way north along the coastline up to the Carolinas or so. And then by the time you get up in the summertime, June, July, August, September, they're all the way up to New York, Long Island here. So you can get them right off the tip of Montauk, way up here. And then in the fall, September, October, this time of year, the water's turning cooler. They're moving the way back down south again. These are the red dots. And then by the time you get down to November, December, here's some December ones, they're right back down here again, right? So these sharks are making this migration all the way up and all the way down the coast here. And what we are interested in is not only what these sharks are doing as they're migrating, but also now looking beyond just the black tips. We know these black tips are here in big numbers. They sweep in by the thousands in the wintertime and spend a few months here. They're having a big ecological impact on the local prey fish population. But we're also starting to say, well, it would be interesting to know what else is happening. What other ecological effects do these black tips have in the environment? And you can think of them as not only the predators on the little bait fish like this, but these black tips are also prey to even bigger sharks like this. And so we have down here a lot of these great hammerhead sharks that swim right up along the beach. And Hannah can speak to this more than I can. We're just starting this hammerhead work. She knows a lot more about it than I do. But you can see how close they are to the shoreline here. Beautiful hammerheads cruising along. And we know from experience, from witnessing this firsthand, that these hammerheads are preying on these blacktip sharks. And so in this case, you have an example of a hammerhead cruising amongst one of these schools of blacktips, and see what happens when he takes off and starts to chase. You can see the little blacktips all bolting, all getting out of the way. Now, just to remind you, these blacktips are about the same size as me. That hammerhead is at least double that size. So these are big 11, 12-foot hammerheads. These are not little trivial sharks here. These are big sharks. And they're not scared of anything. In fact, when they come up beside the boat, they will just look at you, circle around and say, oh, you're of no interest. You're of no threat to me. And then off they go on their merry way. They will just, they're not at all skittish. And you contrast that to the blacktips. The blacktips will just bolt. If you try and get close to them, they jump. The hammerheads, not at all scared of you. And so when the hammerheads come along and they encounter a school of blacktips like this, what I want you to notice is that when these blacktips see them, often they will, clearly they're getting out of the way of this, shark that's twice their size, but they're also often going into shallow water. They're heading, in this case, to the left of the screen, which is toward the beach, rather than into the deeper water. You can see they all ended up on the shallow side, despite the fact that that hammerhead was heading right toward the middle of the school. And one of the reasons that we think they're doing this is they're taking advantage of the shallow water as a refuge to basically hide from these bigger predators. Watch what happens when this big hammerhead tries to catch one of these blacktips. That blacktip is maneuvering, swimming away from it. And what it ends up doing is heading into very shallow water where the big hammerhead simply cannot follow. See, the hammerhead has to turn around. It can't get in there. It's just too big. The little blacktip can get right up on the beach like that and basically get out of the way. The big hammerhead, not nearly as, doesn't have that option. It has to turn around, let the little blacktip go, and then the big hammerhead's cruising back into deeper water again. So what we wanted to do was look at the habitat use of these hammerhead sharks. We know what the blacktips are doing. We have a good idea. We've been studying those for a number of years. We've started recently to look at the hammerheads to see what they're doing. And to do that, we're doing something similar. We're catching the hammerheads, bringing them up beside the boat, and we're instrumenting them with satellite transmitters again. In this case, you see we've got a couple of my students there. We've got the shark beside the boat with the hook, still in the mouth, and we tie a rope around the tail so we're able to string it up, take the measurements. You want to do all this work very quickly because these hammerheads are really delicate. Despite being big, they're a pretty sensitive species. And so we want to work them up as quick as possible and get them on their merry way. And we use a slightly different type of tag. It's a pop-off satellite transmitter. So it stays on the animal, recording data, then at a predetermined time, it pops off and floats to the surface and downloads that information to a satellite overhead. So something like this, the shark is swimming along, the satellite pops off, and the tag pops off, floats to the surface, and then it transmits all those data that's been collecting to an orbiting satellite. And when we actually do it on the shark, it looks something like this. Here's a hammerhead released with one of the pop-off tags, just trailing behind the first dorsal fin like that. And at a predetermined time, that's going to just pop off, float to the surface, and the shark will actually have no hardware left on it at all. So it'll have a little tiny hole in its fin, which will heal up in a matter of a few weeks. And so by looking at all the blacktip data that we've accumulated, and by now collecting all of these additional data from these hammerhead sharks, we hope to get a more comprehensive understanding of what role these sharks are playing down here in the South Florida ecosystem. We're also, what I didn't talk about, we're also looking at the little bait fish that the blacktips are feeding. We're using block cams, as GoPro cameras on a block underwater, and we're counting the fish that swim by. So we're looking at seasonal abundance of bait fish. We're looking at the seasonal abundance of the black tips, and now we're starting to look at the seasonal abundance of the hammerheads as well. And so hopefully, stay tuned, give me another year or two, and we might have some answers for you in terms of what the roles of all these different sharks are down here in the South Florida ecosystem. I'm just going to end by reminding you that humans and sharks are coexisting. You can see a bunch of sharks in the water, a bunch of humans on the beach, and we have relatively few negative interactions down here. We're pretty fortunate to have mostly nice clear water where the sharks can easily distinguish a human from a little bait fish. And so we don't get very many bites down here. And if you do see a shark in the water, just count yourself lucky and make sure that you exercise caution, but enjoy the fact that you're seeing this incredible predator. So I just want to end by acknowledging the Colgan Foundation. They've been sponsors of our work for a number of years. We're very grateful for their continued sponsorship. And if you're on social media, if you're on Twitter or Instagram, if it's working, you can follow us. It's at Shark Migration. And same thing for the Facebook page. It's FAU Shark Migration. You can follow along. And we're actually planning to go fishing on Saturday. So hopefully we'll have a fun post for you at that point. So with that, I'm going to sign off, pass it off to the next speaker, back to Brady, and say thanks so much for the invitation to allow us to share some of the work that we've been doing.
All right, thank you again, Dr. Kajiura. Always interesting to see, and there was a few new little tidbits in there that really blew me away. Looking forward to talking to you about that a little bit later. Again, if you have questions, put them in the chat at any time. We'll come back and talk to them at the end. So thank you again to Dr. Kajiura. We're going to move on. Hannah, are you ready?
I think so. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to turn it over to Hannah Med, Save Our Seas Foundation researcher and founder of the American Shark Conservancy.
Right, and I'm going to try to share my screen.
Okay.
We'll see if this goes right. Let me get this up. 1 second. See if I can do this right. No. Maybe I should have practiced this right. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You should have ability to share.
Yep.
Okay.
It just. Let me get you back. All right. Let's see if we can do this. Does that look like it's sharing?
Looks good.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So yeah, I just thanks so much to the museum and for Save Our Seas for allowing me the opportunity to come and talk. We're always excited to have new venues. I was down in the museum years ago, but this is definitely a new chapter for us at the American Shark Conservancy. So I was going to run through some of the things that we do and hopefully just explain some of the work that we do and kind of who we are. So I'll see if this will advance correctly. Slideshow. Oh no. Okay. So who we are really quickly is we kind of have a mission statement. Basically, the idea behind the formation of the American Shark Conservancy is that whatever we did, whatever research that we wanted to take on, we wanted to make sure that it was relevant to policy. Basically, we're really in close contact with state and federal agencies because we want to make sure that any data that we collect is going to be relevant to making making the management of these vulnerable species of sharks more sustainable. So that's the main mission of the ASC. And we also kind of have another side to us where we try to promote science-based or science literacy and the retention of girls and women in STEM. So that's been kind of our focus as the organization has grown over the past couple of years. So how do we go about doing those things? We focus on two sort of different sectors, one of which is the science and one of which is the outreach and education. So under our science topic, we try to focus on two main areas. So the ecology of coastal and pelagic shark populations, as well as the impacts of recreational shark fishing. And sort of underneath the outreach umbrella falls all the fun stuff, which I enjoy, are the presentations, community events, school programs, things like that, and internships as well. So under our science focus, the ecology of our coastal and pelagic sharks here in Florida, as Dr. Khajura showed you guys, we have this amazing coastline that's very dynamic. We have high levels of biodiversity, which means we have a whole bunch of different types of fish, which means we have a whole bunch of different types of predators like sharks. We have a whole bunch of different types of habitats as well, which means it's important to different sharks during their different life history stages. So it's just a very important area for these highly migratory species. So we figured it's probably really good to keep collecting information and long-term monitoring about the environment that these sharks are, that's so important to some of their life history stages. And the other thing about our location here in South Florida is the fact that we have a lot of different user groups, which means, there's a lot of different fishing. There's a lot of people who like to fish. There's a lot of people who like to dive. So it's sort of this mishmash of different perspectives on how we should look after and manage our sharks. So if we go ahead and make sure that we are doing a long-term monitoring project to determine if any of the changes that we see, whether it's water quality or climate change or maybe pressures from fishing, maybe we can detect those impacts and hopefully identify ways to mitigate them or stop them from being negative impacts. We do this by a couple of different projects. We have a shark diver survey. We do use something very similar to what Dr. Khajura uses at FAU, which are underwater video systems. We are starting to use our drone surveys. So this is our version of the amazing photos and images that he had just shown. So this is a black tip, and in the right corner, you can see one rolling on its back. And we're looking into parasite assemblages and some population genetics as well for different species here in Florida. So one of our more popular programs is the Shark Diver Survey. And basically, it kind of solves a couple of different issues at once, or addresses a couple of different things at once. So on one hand, our trained interns and trained volunteers can go in the water and take pictures of sharks using cameras with a paired lasers on them, so that I don't know if if you're like me, but I can't remember anything after a dive. So I need real-time data collection. So that's where we came up with the camera. So it can collect information on the species, the sex, a whole bunch of different information. And then the paired lasers then are a known distance, fixed distance apart. And then we can use a very simple program to use that known distance on a picture to determine the lengths of the animals. So on one side, we're able to collect all of this great information that's non-invasive. And on the other hand, we also get to kind of include the community, whether or not they, collect the information and use the cameras themselves or even get in the water. We get to spend a day on the boat with them, which is a great chance to talk about sharks and their perceptions and, maybe exchange some information about how they can possibly help conserve them. So I don't know if you can tell on the screen, but if you guys all know, sharks have a skeleton made out of cartilage, and that's very flexible. So they're very bendy, which makes taking a picture of them being perfectly straight at eye level is actually a lot harder than people think. They're made to be super flexible. So we tried to get some images. Luckily, there's some tricks that you can use with the programming and the statistics to kind of work out those details, but it's actually really hard to get a shark to just swim perfectly, perfectly straight right in front of you. So these are just some images. If you can see the little tiny dots in the middle of those circles are laser dots of the lemon shark in the upper left-hand corner, a sandbar in the bottom left, and a silky shark in the upper right. So all of them, like one's kind of swimming away, one's a little low, one's a little high. So those are kind of examples of the average picture that we get. But every once in a while, we are actually able to get a pretty decent straight picture, like the bottom right. And this is just a screen grab from the program that we use to estimate those lengths. In this case, it's a fork length, which is measured from the nose to the tail, where the tail splits into an upper lobe and a bottom lobe. So in that case, that's a really good picture. We're able to get that length measurement, and then that means we can kind of start to put it into age classes, size classes, and kind of extract more information about the sharks that we see here. We're also actually capturing, just by chance, a lot of different information as well. So we're getting some information on a skin condition that we've seen in the lemon sharks here. So we were able to record that and sort of how it's changed over the past couple of years. And then work with some marine veterinarians that are able to help us once we do the biopsies. We're also able to see if it's possible to identify individuals by different markings. A lot of these animals don't have a lot of very clear characteristics that can help identify individuals, and identifying individual sharks can help us with abundance estimates. So we're trying to test that theory on the lemon sharks as well. And we also record when two species are most often likely, to be seen together, which kind of plays into regulations, because we're looking at a bull shark and a sandbar shark in the picture. One is prohibited from harvest and one is not. So if these sharks are spending a whole bunch of time together, that could actually help inform like maybe different regulations about one or the other. We also record whether or not any animal has any kind of fishing gear retention or any injuries that may have come from a fishing interaction. And more recently, we've been identifying different parasites that are on the shark that have been busy, mostly the silky sharks that we have during the summer. So sometimes we're able to just pull one of those off. Again, non-invasively, we don't have to catch a shark, we can actually just kind of pick one of those off. But if we can't, we always have this video to reference and go back and count the parasite load that's on the different sharks and see if it's changing over time. And our main science project and sort of focus area has really been on recreational shark fishing. So we're looking at hammerheads in a different way than Dr. Khajura and his lab are. We're looking at sort of that intersection of how humans interact with these animals in the form of recreational fishing. And that's really important, honestly, because recreational fishing doesn't have a lot of data or very detailed information about how many people fish, where they fish, what they fish for, what they catch, and how well that catch does once it's been released. So our current project that was funded by the Save Our Seas is a post-release mortality of great hammerhead sharks in what's called the shore-based shark fishing fishery here in Florida. And in the future, we're hoping to expand that to boat-based shark fishing and targeting different species, as well as an angler-based data collection program. So why did we look at great hammerheads? Unfortunately, they're, like Dr. Khajura said, they're big and they're amazing, but they're actually quite sensitive. I don't know if you know anybody like that. My husband's kind of like that. So he's, they're big animals. You think that they can be pretty tough, but it turns out the circumstances when you're shore-based fishing don't lend themselves very well to the animal's biology. So sharks, the hammerhead are ram ventilating species, which means they have to keep swimming forward to force water over their gills. And unfortunately, when you're catching something from shore, it's not like when you're alongside a boat and the boat can move forward and push water over their gills. They're sort of just caught in the wash there. So we were concerned that whether or not this was going to be, a little too stressful for them. They're obviously pretty large, so they're subjected to gravity. Other studies did say that fight time for any of different types of fisheries actually increases their susceptibility to stress. And sometimes some of the reviews that we did of shore-based shark fishing was that some of these fight times could be several hours. So that was a big concern. Air exposure, obviously it's a marine animal, so it's probably not supposed to be exposed to air. And again, like I said before, Florida's awesome habitat, and it's a very essential, it's actually categorized as essential fish habitat for great hammerheads, which means that it is something that's really important to different stages in its life. And previous studies have shown that they really don't do well, even if they're released from commercial fishing, like different types of fishing, they actually swim off and don't survive. So our approach to this project was a little bit different than some of the other ones that have looked at it before. And we decided we were going to work with the anglers to get this information. And that sort of helped us. That has several benefits. One, it's an accurate representation of how the fishing is actually done. And it's, helped us. We didn't know. I'm not a shore-based shark fisher person, so I had no idea where to start. So we had to rely on the anglers to let us know, more about these, how this fishing would go. And once they were involved, the major benefit is whatever the outcomes are, whatever the results are, they buy into that information because we were super transparent and they were part of the process. So that's another big benefit to kind of taking that approach. And we basically just work with the anglers. They let us know if they're going out fishing. We sit on the beach and wait for a rod to go off. And once it does and they get a shark in, we record the time that the shark takes the bait and is landed and then is released. And we affix a satellite tag, just like the one that Dr. Khajura had said, that pops off. Ours is set to pop off in 28 days. There's two circumstances where it will come off: 28 days, or if the shark stays at a constant depth for more than 3 days. And that would indicate that it is actually a mortality event. So in this bottom two pictures, you can see something that kind of looks like maybe like a handheld microphone. And that is the tag. And when the shark swims off, then we wait to see if that reports to the satellites. And we're hoping it's definitely well outside of the 3-day mark. So in these two different graphs on the left-hand side, this is what it looks like when a shark doesn't make it. You'll see 0 at the very top, and basically that's the beach. And as it drops down into the depth and sort of rolls around at 15 meters, that means the shark stayed there for 3 days, and we were, that indicates a mortality event. As opposed to a shark that swims off and does perfectly fine and survives, the graph on the right-hand side, where you'll see it takes off, but they do kind of like a typical yo-yo dive to kind of recover from it. So they'll go down into the cooler waters and then kind of come back up to the warmer surface temperatures. And they'll continue to do that until they sort of even out a little bit. So that's kind of a shark thing that many species do. So our results so far, we've fished well over 75 nights over the last couple of years. We've worked with more than 60 anglers. We put out 16 tags, and I guess I'm happy to say that this is a lower than expected mortality. We were afraid that it was going to be quite high, and we found that it's actually quite low, which kind of made us think, I wonder how the set of anglers kind of that we work with compare to the rest of the fishery. So we did a survey of all of the people who ever got a shore-based shark fishing permit from the state of Florida. So we emailed 10,000 people. We got about almost 950 responses back. And we found that they fell into 3 categories. They are either really novice and didn't fish very often, or very experienced and didn't fish very often, or were really skilled and fished all the time. And it turns out those are the guys that we were working with. So we need to think about that when we're interpreting our results, because they don't actually represent what the entire fishery looks like. So we're addressing that in a couple of different ways, but it was really good for us to stop and think, oh, maybe we're not getting the whole picture here. We did learn some other things, that almost $500,000 is spent specifically on shore-based shark fishing gear each year. And their main motivation actually is to be outside and by the water. So we were able to learn a lot about this fishery. So on sort of the other end of our spectrum for ASC is our outreach and education programs. Obviously, it's been a little bit strange over the past 18 months or so. We haven't gotten out to a whole bunch of public events, but we typically we were doing about two a month, which was a hectic schedule, but we love being out there and really connecting with the community. We also provide our data to policymakers. So we are contributing our data that we've collected so far from the shore-based shark fishing to the first ever federal stock assessment for hammerheads. That's actually happening right now in October, November, we're having a whole bunch of webinars, getting all of the information we possibly can about these sharks into the actual policy of how to, decide who gets what quota and et cetera. So we're really excited that our data is actually going towards something that's, policy based. Member of the shark panel for the Florida agency, the FWC. And we also host interns every summer, 1 to 2 interns gets to come and do as much work as we can possibly get them to do and introduce them to the education and outreach and also all of our science and field work. And so with that, I just encourage you, if you want to learn more about our organization, please check out our website. We're again on all of the social media platforms. Apparently one of the girls has put us on TikTok. I don't know anything about TikTok. So you'll have to look us up. I'm not sure. And a big special thank you to our funders, obviously Save Our Seas, Microwave Telemetry, lots of individual amazing donors, a ton of advisors from agencies to academia, and our lovely volunteers and assistants. And I guess with that, I will hand it back over to Brady.
All right, thank you, Hannah Med. First time on our Save Our Seas Distinguished Speaker Series. With a lot of great info topics we've never even thought of asking about here. So thank you again for that. We'll look forward to hearing more from you in the Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat at any time. We're going to turn things over now to Dr. Marianne Porter. We're ready, and just sent you request. There she is.
Excellent.
All right. And thank you. Take it away, Dr. Marianne Porter.
See,
I'm seeing, yes.
okay, we got it.
Good.
Always the adventure, right?
Yes.
Worked out really well that I get to go 2 really great talks talking about the shark Florida and looking at where they go. Looking at sharks and thinking about how did I study biomechanics, and that means I use engineering and physics to understand how organisms work. So some of the big questions that motivate my research include, how do animals underlying skills to happen? And I use to think about those questions. So I think about biological materials. How is our shark put together? That gets to the squishy cartilage. So what are these sharks made of? I also think about the mechanics. So what happens when you stick a whole bunch of cartilage? I think about the locomotion. So what happens when you actually build an animal? Because evolutionarily, most of our are made with a bony skeleton. So tonight, what we're going to actually do is I'm going to walk you through a few of my experiments. So you're going with me here, and we're going to look at sort of the questions I asked and the hypotheses that came from them. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about shark skeletons and swimming. So we've got our little shark vertebrae here and our little swimming shark. And here we go. I hope you're ready to be scientists with me. So first, a little background. Sharks have skeletons that are made of cartilage. And here, if you can see my pointer, you can see the vertebral column of a shark is going to extend from the chondrocranium, so the skull of the shark, all the way down the length of a tail. And this is an X-ray. So this is going to be our shark, essentially imaged the way you would go get your arm imaged if you broke your arm. And one of the things that's interesting about the vertebral column is, as a shark wiggles back and forth to swim, would be coming in and out of the screen at you. And that's how the body of the shark is going to push against the water. And that's going to produce the thrust that moves the shark forward. The mechanics of the vertebral column, which is this, central rod through the tube of the shark, essentially, they're going to be really important for teaching us how a shark can swim. So is this rod going down the shark really stiff and strong, or is it really wiggly? So the way the vertebral column wiggles back and forth can really impact the way different species swim. So today we're going to walk through these experiments to study how vertebrae withstand forces, what about the shape of the vertebrae allows them to do that, and how we can study swimming down the whole body. So first experiment, I want to show you about a paper that we published in 2018. Take vertebrae from these 6 species of shark, a dusky shark, a blue shark, a white shark, and a poor beagle. These animals were caught from fishing tournaments, and as fisheries able to dissect their vertebrae. And in this study, we were able to take vertebrae from the front of the shark and the back of the shark in all of these species. And what we did is we put them on a giant machine that engineers use to study steel and concrete. And what we did is we smashed the vertebrae just to see how they work as a building block, how they work as a material, and putting this shark together. And what we found, so the back half of the shark is better able to withstand forces than the front end of the shark. So this back is going to be what we call stiffer if we're thinking about engineering terms. And this was really exciting to us because when sharks swim, they generate a wave down their body. We think that the forces produced by the back end of the body are going to be most important for pushing against the water and generating the thrust needed for the shark to swim. So this was very exciting. Just from a simple mechanical standpoint, the vertebrae from the back of the shark seemed like they were going to be good at withstanding forces and allowing these animals to swim. So the next thing we wanted to look at, our next experiment, was to, now that we've smashed the vertebrae, we wanted to actually look at the way the vertebrae were shaped to see if there was something about the back end of these sharks that were allowing them to withstand those forces greater. So what we were able to do is we were able to look at these vertebrae themselves, and we can use CT imaging, so CAT scan imaging. This essentially builds a 3D X-ray for us to look at what these vertebrae would look like essentially in the shark. And so to look at the vertebrae themselves, we can start to really think about how they're able to withstand these forces. So here are 4 of the shark species that we looked at in the previous study. We've got our mako, our poor beagle, our thresher shark, and our white shark. Now, these all look like little discs, like little sort of hard candy lozenges, but they're actually vertebrae from sharks. But they all have this sort of similar concave roof to our vertebrae. These species have these plates right here that make up their vertebrae. So it's not just solid cartilage. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at the vertebrae at the front end and the back end of these sharks and see what these vertebrae look like. How many plates? Because that's something simple that we can count. So here is a melt-away of each of these species. And we can already see that there are some differences between our species. So just looking at them immediately, we can see the poor beagle in these anterior vertebrae. So at the front of the shark, the poor beagle does not have very many plates. So its vertebra probably isn't as fortified as some of these other species. Like, look at this thresher, has so many of these plates. So we see that there are differences among our species. What about the front and the back end of the shark? Is the back end of the shark going to tell us something that really would explain why they can generate or why they can withstand more forces? Well, it turns out they did. So now here, looking at this poor beagle again, that's easy enough to count, we're able to see that just with a simple visual inspection, we counted all of them for our actual study, but here you can just take a look, the anterior vertebrae have very few plates and the posterior vertebrae have more plates. And that's where we saw greater forces that we think are important for generating thrust and helping those animals swim through the water. So here's a comparison of all of these species that we've looked at. And you can see that the posterior vertebrae have thicker plates. They often have more plates. And this was really exciting because, again, it helps us explain how these animals might be generating and dealing with the forces required for swimming. A really interesting bit of this is our thresher shark. The thresher shark has a whole bunch of plates all through the body. The front of the shark is very fortified. The back of the shark is really fortified. So we did not see as many differences in the thresher shark as we did from the other species when we looked at the front vertebrae versus the back vertebrae. And so we think that this might have to do with the special way that the thresher sharks use their tails or their caudal fins. This is a study from 2013 by Oliver et al. And this is just a screenshot from one of their figures in their paper. And it shows some frames of video of what the thresher shark is doing over time. So we can see our shark right here in frame 1, and we can see all these fish swimming around. And what we can see is that over time, our thresher shark is going to have its little nose kind of pointed up at about 8 degrees here. It's going to dip its nose a little bit, about 15 degrees from where we started in frame 1. And as it dips its nose, its tail starts to move forward in a very unshark-like sort of maneuver. And we see this angle increase even more as it starts to bring its tail forward and brings it forward in this whip-like fashion to where we see here in frame 8 that the tail is actually exceeding where the nose of the shark is. So this is, as Hannah said, a very bendy shark. And so what is very interesting about this is now I've told you how we've measured forces in the vertebrae, and we thought that the vertebrae in the posterior end would need to generate more forces to produce swimming. And this seems true, except for in the case of our thresher shark, which is going to need to maybe have a really well-fortified vertebral column all the way down its body to be able to produce the movements needed to do this whipping action with its tail. All right, so now we're starting to think about how the vertebrae withstand forces when we smushed them. And we saw that the shape of the vertebrae might help sort of fortify those vertebrae so that they can withstand more forces. Now we want to think about, how does swimming vary between the front and the back of the shark? Can we learn anything about that? So I spend an awful lot of time watching sharks swim. I find it very relaxing and also very informative. And in this study, we were tracking the midline of these sharks. So essentially, imagine there's a line right down the middle of this shark. These are baby hammerhead sharks, much smaller than the ones that Hannah and Steve look at. What we were able to do is decompose these sharks into a series of points that make the shark a lot easier for me to study. So I can deconstruct an animal that's made of millions of pixels or points into just a few areas of research. And then what I'm able to do is I'm able to kind of group those areas, and we can measure where these points move through space and time. So here we can see the differences in amplitude and frequency of the head in blue, the front end of the shark, and the tail of the shark in red. And so what we can see is that amplitude and frequency of the head and the tail are different. So now we're seeing that perhaps there are actually ways that the different fortified vertebrae from the anterior and the posterior end of the shark are actually resulting in movement of the shark during swimming. And so that we can see there are differences in swimming here, and we can measure those by studying the vertebrae with standing forces and looking at their morphology and how these sharks are put together. Because we do have access to the Atlantic Ocean, we skipped a slide here. There we go. So now we're using drones like Steve and Hannah, and we're able to study these animals in the wild. So we can take that video like we used in the lab, where we deconstruct the shark into a bunch of points. We can do that to sharks swimming around. Here's some black-tip sharks swimming under our drone. And we can see how these animals are swimming in their natural environment. And we can also study large sharks. So remember the little baby hammerheads I studied in the lab? They were tiny. They were about a year old, less than a year old. I cannot put a big full-size hammerhead in the tanks at Gumbo Limbo. Steve said they're about twice the size of him, twice the size of those black-tip sharks. So those aren't really sharks that I can put in the lab to study. So now we're able to use these drones to think about studying animals and thinking about how they swim by themselves and also how they swim in groups. And then we're also working on technology where we are working to study how these animals are swimming in 3D, which is another area we're looking at. So with that, I will finish up by thanking the National Science Foundation and the Save Our Seas Foundation for funding. And we have a lot of great collaborators, and of course, FWC and the FAA and all of our regulatory agencies that help us out. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, and thank you to Dr. Porter for that information. We're going to open it up. We got a little bit of time for questions. I'm going to start with questions for Dr. Khajura, because I know he has to get off the call in just a few minutes. So trying to bring him back on if he's available still. If not, we'll move back around and have a discussion.
Oh,
so again,
here.
if you have, huh? He's here.
I said, I'm here, don't worry.
All right, here he is. So now's your time to ask any of these wonderful shark scientists whatever you might want to know from them. For Dr. Khajura, I just want to say I've heard Dr. Khajura presenting several times with my work here at the museum, and I've gotten some questions from some people in the chat about the same thing. The hammerhead sharks coming into shore, and it looked like they were attacking the black tips. Was new to me. And I don't know if maybe I've spaced out during that part of the presentation before, but that was really something to see. How long have you been seeing the hammerheads come into your research transects?
We've been looking, we've been seeing this for the past few years now, and it's really with the advent of drones that we're able to capture this sort of interaction. It's probably been, obviously it's been happening for millions of years, we just haven't seen it. But with more drones in the air, we are able to capture this footage now, and it's interesting because we're documenting these cool behaviors that give us not only the behavior of the predator and the prey, but we can take that footage and pass it off to Dr. Porter, where her students can look at the kinematics of these animals as they're doing the chasing. As these hammerheads or blacktips just cruising along, then they pick up speed and swim away. That's a very different swimming behavior. And similarly, as they're maneuvering to get out of the way of the hammerhead predators, that's a very different sort of swimming behavior as well. And so I think it's neat that we have this opportunity to share this information and share this footage and share this, these resources among all of us. And it just helps to promote the science. Everyone benefits from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, kind of nice to discover that on a more regular basis, that there are, hammerheads that close to shore. I mean, that's something I wouldn't be aware of. Had one more question for you before you have to jump off. Stacey wanted to know if there are any just comment on the types of tags that you use Are there any tags that you consider better than others, or are there different tags for different situations? Or we talk a little bit about the equipment you use?
It's really different tags enable us to answer different questions. And so some of the tags we're using are long life acoustic tags that are surgically implanted into the animal. And those will last like 6 to 10 years. And so you're able to get information on that migrating animal over multiple migratory cycles. And so that's great. But they rely on receivers underwater to hear them. And that's different than these satellite tags where the fin breaks the surface and it talks to the transmitter. It gives you instantaneous real-time information of the location of that animal, but that's all it gives you, as opposed to the other ones, the pop-off ones that are recording temperature, depth, light level, a bunch of information, and then uploading all that after weeks or months. And so depending on what question you want, there's different technology to enable you to get to that. And just have to choose the right tool to get to the question that you want answered.
Yeah. And just one more thing before you jump off, just based on kind of patterns, what you've been seeing the past few years, what is the kind of upcoming forecast, if you have one, for black tip migrations this winter?
I'm predicting we have a really bad year again, sadly. So what's been happening is consistently the water temperature has been creeping up for the past more than a decade now. And the shark abundance has been going down, down, down. And I think what's happening is as these sharks are migrating down south here, they're encountering their preferred water temperature at higher and higher latitudes. Why swim all the way down to Palm Beach if the water's just fine off Sebastian or something, right? And so we're simply not seeing the big numbers, the big schools of sharks down here that we used to just a decade ago. And I think it's going to continue. I mean, ocean temperatures keep rising. And so we're probably going to see fewer and fewer of these big aggregations coming this far down. I keep hoping for a really cold winter. I really want the sharks here, but sadly, I don't think it's going to happen.
Certainly ready. Me and the black tips are both ready for a nice, abnormally cold winter down here. Dr. Kajiura, thank you so much again for joining us. I know you have to get off, but
so much, yeah.
I hope to see you again soon in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Sorry I have to run, but I got to give my students an exam. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So again, we still have Drs. Porter and Hammerhead with us. So if anybody has any questions, I know we got a few in the chat to get to. Going to start with, well, first of all, we had a few people asking Hannah about information on how to get involved with the American Shark Conservancy, where they can find info on the summer internship programs.
Yeah, honestly, we across all of our social media channels and our website as well, but I handle most of the emails myself. So it's hannah@americansharkconservancy.org. As our projects are growing, we have a lot of work for interns to do. So we'd love to hear from you.
Got a couple questions here for Dr. Porter. Stacey's wanting to know, based on the CT image for the thresher shark, that the mako was very similar between the anterior and posterior. Was there something, does that have any correlation with the speed or the shape of those sharks?
Yeah, so that is an excellent question. And that is what we think might be happening, but we don't have quite as large of a sample size analyzed yet for the mako shark. That's one of my few pretty pictures. So I don't want to say too much about that yet, but makos do have some pretty amazing vertebral columns. One of the things that they have that I will tell you about is something that you can see just on dissection. So most sharks, when you dissect their vertebral column, you just cut through the joints between the soft, and it's easy to cut through. And it's really easy to dissect. Makos, their joints are under a ton of pressure. So when you cut through the ligament holding the joint together, capsule, it's under pressure and it squirts out at you. And so if you're doing a dissection and you get squirted by shark juice, it's always a little bit jarring, especially when you don't expect it to happen. And so that is how I learned about the high pressure in mako intervertebral joints. And so in addition to the way their vertebrae work, their column in general is very stiff, I think. And then also makos have these really interesting tendon systems where their tendons are very long compared to other sharks. And the tendons insert right at the caudal peduncle near the caudal fin. That is really useful for them to be able to generate forces down their body and help them be super fast swimmers. So everything about the makos is really awesome. Plus they have those pointy little snouts that are just so amazing and hydrodynamic.
Great. And some more questions coming through. This one's for Hannah, talking about now, first of all, with Hannah's research, I was unaware that shore-based shark fishing was a thing at all. So that was quite an eye-opener, and because we had just assumed that there were so many restrictions on shark fishing and regulations on shore-based fishing, I would have never even thought of that. So having data about that coming in, do you expect to see any changes in those patterns over time, or what kind of things do you see kind of consistently with your data, and what will you expect in the future from that?
Yeah, I mean, we were really surprised as well, to be honest with you. The accuracy of the data regarding recreational fishing in general is really not great. It's kind of all over the place. The quality is kind of all over the place. And so that's kind of have raised some red flags. And I think we were all so focused on the impacts of commercial fishing, because obviously the thought of like a long line with like thousands of hooks and, the potential impact there is actually really, that's what I think people focused on initially. And then recreational is always like, oh, it's catch and release, it's fine. But what we're finding is that, some of these animals, even though the fishermen sort of, let them swim off, it's no big deal. If they swim off within an hour, 3 hours, that animal could actually die. And no one would have any idea if it wasn't for these tags and this work, being done. So when we kind of calculate how many can the commercial fishermen take when we're looking at the whole stock, we're not counting all of the ones that are dying in the recreational fishery because we just don't know. So it's kind of like a best guess, but that best guess could be way off. So that's why these data are so important, because it's actually all linked together. And I think we've seen a growing number of participants, and there was a big boost in 2000, and I think from our survey we saw in like 2016, I want to say. So we're doing some dives into like what was going on that, we saw like a doubling of shore-based shark fishermen here in Florida. So we'll if we find out, we'll let you guys know what that was about.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of interesting, and thank you for looking into that, because I, wouldn't have even thought that was a thing.
Yeah.
We got a general question from Susan for either one of you. Can sharks hear?
So I was going to say, this would have been a great question for Dr. Khajura, who also is an expert in shark sensory systems. But what we do know is sharks can hear, and there were some really classic experiments, I think, looking at shark hearing, and there was a PhD student who did his dissertation on shark hearing in, say, like the early 2000s/2010s. But there is not a lot of research on shark hearing in general. And I do know that Dr. Khajura, one of his graduate students, is doing experiments looking at shark hearing right now. So I guess you'll have to have him back, or invite back his graduate student to talk about that at another time. But yes, sharks can hear, and they're pretty good at it.
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of sounds going on. Yeah, I wasn't sure about that either. So I'm going to pretend that just came from Susan. I was wondering that as well. I always want to know what things can hear. So yeah, another question for Dr. Porter from Claire. Is there any connection between the differences in those vertebrae? Because first of all, those vertebrae images were really stunning. They kind of look like snowflakes, and like, the symmetry of them and the difference in patterns. What are the kind of connections you see? Is there any connection between the differences in the shark vertebrae and any like conservation rates or survival rates of those sharks? Hang on, got it.
There we go. All right, unmuted. Yeah, so that's a really great question. In terms of conservation rates and how they know enough about that, we can use shark vertebrae to age sharks and get a sense of how old they are. Although that is super variable among species. Use the vertebrae to age one species might not work for another species. So there it's very species kind of and so in and thinking about how they can act in that way, you know, that it helps us age them. And when we do catch these fishing tournaments and bycatch, it can give us an idea of what the animals are. More in general, my research is useful for sort of general conservation efforts because, you know, we can know and what they're doing, but understanding the basic biology of how this animal is put together can tell us an awful lot, especially when it comes to conservation. So something people don't in terms of conservation, but just our general understanding of the basic science of the anatomy and together is really important in how we understand a lot of what it's doing otherwise.
Good. Okay. I just had a question come in from Marie. This might be good for Hannah and just a general. Marie is asking, I heard there's an area in Pompano that you can swim with sharks. Is that true? As a resident of Pompano, I can answer that. The answer is the ocean, where I encountered a shark I was swimming. I didn't think it was evening or dusk or anything, but definitely had a contact encounter with what looked like a small kind of dogfish shark, but it was a shark. So you can go swimming with sharks in Pompano whenever you'd like. There are plenty in the ocean. If you're looking at Dr. Kajiura's research, there are a lot of sharks just within range there. For Hannah, with that being said, with sharks, you know, and with the amount of sharks we see in proximity to the shoreline, and with shark fishing from the shore, I guess, being more and more popular, what are some conservation concerns of that intersection of so many people and so many sharks in one place, and with the sharks being fished for and looked for in that way?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of stole my dad joke there with if the water's salty, there's probably a shark in it. So that's usually our go-to. But I've also seen Dr. Kajiura has a really great an aerial view, and then it shows a person swimming and the shark, and he's like, pretty much if you've been in the water, you've been within 6 feet or 7 feet of a shark. So I actually gave a presentation at a Chamber of Commerce once about the black tips and the migration and the sharks here and how they're an asset. And I had a lot of scared businessmen's faces. And I was just trying to explain to them that, like, you know, this is a really good sign. If they're here, it means we have prey. If we have prey, it means the habitats are okay. So it's actually a good sign. You know, we've kind of looked at when the shore-based shark fishing thing came up as a conservation issue, was brought forward by a bunch of just general citizens who had seen some sharks wash up dead. A little girl had been bitten in an area where they thought someone was fishing. So it was definitely on the top of the list for managers was like, okay, so is this activity, causing is there a human safety issue here? And from everything that we've seen, there's not been, like here in the States, a directed study about whether or not the sharks are being, brought into shore because of the fishing. But from everything we've seen, especially, and there's constant crossover with our work, but again, with Dr. Khajura's, and all the drone footage that we're seeing out there, there's so much evidence to say the sharks are there anyway. They're certainly quite shallow. The crossover of what kind of water they use and the kind of water we use that's a big overlap. So in reality, we're spending a lot of time in the water, really close to sharks. And the proportion of incidents is so tiny, which I'm sure everyone's heard before, all the statistics of you're more likely, to die from getting hit by a coconut, et cetera, which there's some issues with those comparisons. But that being said, there really are, the chance that you've been in that water, and especially when it comes to the fishing, that's mostly, which was great when we did the survey, because we had our perceptions about what this fishing and this fishery looked like. But, asking the people who actually do it, we realized that it's mostly at night. They kayak 300 to 400 yards offshore to drop their bait. So at that point, in some of these areas, you're already in 50 feet of water, if not more. So it's really not in the majority of the people's depth that people use. So there are a lot of factors where it's like, I really don't think that that is bringing sharks in closer. And then again, with all the drone footage these days, we're seeing that on their own, those sharks are coming in closer as well. And yet, if we were on the menu, we would know about it. They're so close by, the incidence numbers would be so much higher. So that's kind of just putting things into perspective is, I think, really important when talking about it.
Great. Yeah. So I know we're just about out of time. We got a couple more questions. I kind of want to tie in those concepts just real quick before we leave. We were just talking about swimming with sharks and encountering sharks, and how likely that might be. If you're in the ocean, you have a chance of encountering a shark, especially if you're snorkeling or anything like that. On a reef, someone was asking about, where plenty of sharks on a coral reef for sure. What is the ethical behavior if you do encounter a shark? And even if you are, like Claire in the chat was just asking, if you, there's a lot of companies that will go and like take tourists to go cage diving with sharks or something like that. Or even if you just encounter sharks on the reef, whatever it is, what's the ethical behavior? How should you approach a shark? Because I know it could be kind of like an instinct thing. If you approach a shark and you're not expecting to, you're kind of acting on impulse. What should people have in mind to maybe prepare themselves for the possibility of encountering a shark in the wild or in a cave? Either one, and we can maybe start with Hannah on this.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question on both sides. First and foremost, there's a really funny voice clip that was played over and over on a Shark Week like years ago. If you don't want to be prey, don't act like prey. It sounds a little simplistic, but in essence, it's what I try to tell people all the time, is just, is being like in any kind of interaction with a shark. It is scary. Don't get me wrong. Listen, we are all programmed to be worried about that situation, and that's completely normal. But it's just, again, to remember we're not on the menu. So staying calm and, asserting yourself as big, if not bigger than most of the sharks that you'll probably see. So I think a lot of times that little sentence, I think, is helpful for people to remember. And, if you flee, a lot of the times, no matter what kind of predator is, you trigger that predator instinct. And then on the flip side, we've actually been working with the operators here in Florida that specifically take people out to see sharks. They've gotten a lot of flack in the past. There's been a lot of controversy. So they've decided to come together and create best practices. So we've been trying to help them formulate best practices. And I would encourage anyone who wants to do this for fun to do a little bit of research into whether or not these companies have those best practices, and if they have any kind of, just do a little bit of research. I think that's always the best case and the best idea if you're going to take any kind of ecotourism jaunt. So I'll let Marianne chime in if she wants.
Yeah, so I think Hannah's pictures trying to show that perfect lateral view of a shark really capture what we see. Most of the time when you see a shark, when I'm out diving, I am so excited, and I usually get the tail end of the shark because they are swimming away. So that opportunity to have a shark swim right up next to you is not something that happens very often. And even just to get that nice lateral view in a photo is so hard because, usually they see you, they're like swimming away. And yeah, it's just like every other wildlife encounter that you probably have, right? You don't poke the bears, you don't poke the sharks, you watch them and keep your distance. That's just the safest thing to do.
Absolutely. And just, keeping a mindset of treating whoever, whatever you're encountering with a bit of respect and for its space and what it's capable of.
Sure. What I always tell my little kid, you may look with your eyes, not with your hands.
Exactly. Great advice for everybody out there. Well, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Dr. Marianne Porter and Hannah Med for joining us, as well as Dr. Stephen Khajura, who had to jump off a little early. Thank you again for joining us. I hope to hear from you all again sometime in the future. And thank you to everybody for joining us tonight and for any other events in this series. We always love doing this. We'll be doing more in the future. Please stay tuned on our website for future events. If anybody local to South Florida wants to help out with some conservation, we'll be hosting a beach cleanup this weekend, Saturday morning at Dr. Von D. Meisel, Eula Johnson State Beach, just near Dania Pier, just a little north of that. We'll be at the Jetty parking lot from 8 to 11 a.m. So hope to see you all out there Saturday morning if you want to come out. But thank you for joining us tonight. I always love this panel discussion and hosting these talks. We hope to see you again in the future. Again, thanks to our presenters tonight. Thank you to the Save Our Seas Foundation for making this all possible, as well as all of the research you've heard about here and some of the programming we do here at the museum. I'm Brady Newbill at the Museum of Discovery and Science, signing off tonight. Everybody have a lovely evening, and we hope to see you again soon.